Chapter 90 Flying Sword? From the situation in the arena, it seemed that the violent man held an absolute advantage. However, no one knew that this particular person, who seemed to be incomparably mighty, was actually secretly grumbling to himself. Every fist he unleashed caused a portion of the barrier of golden light to cave in. The impacts fiercely vibrated the barrier. It would only be a matter of time before the barrier would be totally destroyed. But no one knew that every time the man's fists had come into contact with the golden light, the man could feel a sharp wave of rebound energy that seemed to reciprocate the strength he used. Currently, all four of his limbs were grievously damaged. He knew that once the effects of his skill faded, all of his limbs would probably be immensely swollen. In addition, the barrier of golden light had an insane recovery rate. After a short while, the portions that he caved in with his attacks would immediately return back to their original shapes, as if the barrier was never damaged in the first place. Moreover, his previous attacks were aimed randomly at the barrier of golden light, merely causing its shape to be distorted, but other than that, there seemed to be no other effect on the barrier whatsoever. The tall and sturdy man continued in this manner for a period of time, while the barrier of golden light vibrated intensely, as if it would break apart at any moment. Now, the thoughts of everyone present went in the opposite direction. They understood that this tall and sturdy man's attacks were unable to destroy the golden barrier. His immense strength would at most be able to create some dents on the barrier, but it would not able to completely destroy it. So not only did Jia Tianlong abolish the idea of sending reinforcements, but the dwarf also regained his former composure. But because he had embarrassed himself earlier, Monk Golden Light's features seemed to have a trace of embarrassment, and as he stared at the strong and sturdy man, his gaze became increasingly malevolent. But because he was suffering the barrage of attacks from his opponent, his body was unable to stand straight, and every magic technique he intended to cast misfired. As such, he stopped his incantations and stared intently at his opponent while muttering a string of curses under his breath in an unknown language. As for the tall and sturdy man, he did not feel any changes, so he continued frenziedly attacking the golden barrier. The spectators all thought that this individual had boundless energy and would never need to rest. Clang clang clatter. Exerting his full strength, that ferocious man unleashed 2 strikes and a kick before turning his back in retreat. That massive frame of his did not seem to hinder his speed. The man's actions caused the spectators to be shocked. A commotion arose shortly after. Monk Golden Light was shocked as well, but he swiftly flew into a rage. He hurriedly sat down and crossed his legs. Placing a black box horizontally onto his lap, he began to mumble an incantation. Both his hands were extended in front of his chest in a strange position as he shivered forcefully, expending a seemingly tremendous amount of energy. Looking at the violent convulsions shaking the dwarf's body, everyone present thought it was as if all the fingers on his hands possessed the strength of 1,000 Jin 1. At this moment, the tall and sturdy man had already left the area designated for the 7 Mystery Sect, as if he wanted to retreat back to the crowd. However, he suddenly heard a loud voice from behind his back. "Rise!" He saw the face of Wang Juchu, who was standing in front of him, fall drastically as the audience collectively shouted out, "Be careful!" The tall and sturdy man trembled as he hurriedly dodged to the left and cast a side glance at the dwarf, only to see a ray of gray light swiftly approaching his previous position, missing him by a narrow margin. His heart froze, but he relaxed, since he had managed to dodge this hidden weapon attack. He would be reunited with his 2 senior martial uncles soon and could then take a breather, but before he had even completed this thought, he felt an extreme pain in his right arm. As he turned his gaze, another exclamation of shock could be heard from the audience. Within that cacophony of noise, the voices of his 2 senior martial uncles were heard, filled with immense worry and apprehension. That man was slightly stunned, as if he did not understand what had happened. At this moment, he saw another ray of gray light appear in his line of sight, piercing through his chest. Looking at the shape of the weapon, it appeared to be the same hidden weapon that he had dodged earlier. The man was shocked and angered. He wanted to open his mouth to say something, but as the sound Putong rang out, his body collapsed on the ground. It was only at this moment that the man realized that his right arm had already been broken without him being aware. Fresh blood flowed unceasingly from the wound. What happened? The man asked, his stomach full of confusion and unwillingness. But soon after, his vision went black as his consciousness faded into oblivion. Even until the point of death, he was not able to understand what had happened, but the members from both the Feral Wolf Gang and the Seven Mysteries sect were able to see clearly what had happened. From what they understood, after Monk Golden Light had finished his incantation and shouted "Rise," a ray of grey light shot forth from the black box, spiraling around the head of the dwarf before following the direction that his finger was pointing in and flying towards that tall and sturdy man. Although the man dodged out of reflex, avoiding the strike through his chest, he had no way to avoid the attack that was directed to the back of his arm. It seemed that the ray of grey light was incredibly sharp. Even after slicing his arm, the man still had no knowledge or realization that something had happened. Afterwards, the crowd was even more astounded. After the ray of grey light was avoided, it continued following the finger movements of the dwarf, flying far ahead in front of the warrior and abruptly changed directions. It pierced straight through the chest of the defenseless man and easily robbed him of his life. Everyone was stunned into silence by what had just occurred and instinctively fixed their gazes on the ray of grey light that had returned to the dwarf and was now spiraling above the dwarf's head. The words "flying sword" appeared involuntarily in the majority of the spectators' minds. Although these people did not know about the existence of immortal cultivators, even they had heard of the various legends and miraculous stories of flying swords. This ray of grey light was extremely similar to the rumored flying sword used by the legendary Immortals. Could the unsightly dwarf be one of the fabled sword Immortals? The majority of the crowd fixated their gazes, now filled with respect, at the dwarf. The title of Sword Immortal was enough to cause many mortals to be filled with fear. Monk Golden Light now held his head high with his chest out, considering himself to be unparalleled in this world. He manipulated the ray of grey light to soar above his head in a wild dance until it resembled a huge grey python, causing exclamations of awe to come out from the Feral Wolf Gang. On the other hand, those representing the Seven Mysteries sect were speechless and downcast. Imminent defeat was apparent in their hearts. If one were to say that the morale of Jia Tianlong's men was greatly increased while that of the Seven Mysteries sect was greatly diminished, he or she would not be wrong. After all, Jia Tianlong had managed to enlist the aid of a sword immortal. Han Li was the only one in the crowd who felt extreme joy in his heart. Han Li realized that this Monk Golden Light's flying sword technique was exactly the same as the telekinesis technique that he himself had learned. Although he did not know if the ray of grey light was indeed a sword, he knew that telekinesis technique could only control tangible objects. This fact was undeniable. Currently, Han Li's heart surged with the intent to fight. It seemed that his interest towards this fellow immortal cultivator was growing increasingly high. 1 jin is equal to half a kilogram or 1.102 pounds.